Hello there, I'm Soma Mysteria, and today we're going to be looking at one of the many things that get overlooked in D&D. Today we're going to be discussing the alignment chart. Very likely for you to see an image like this that appears all over the internet, but it doesn't really say anything about what the alignment chart is, just showing you characters. Often this is people's first exposure to the alignment chart. So it's understandable that when we go from this to D&D, why people can get some misconceptions. The first thing is the alignment chart is not a series of 9 squares. Yes, these are very pretty set out 9 squares, but that is not what makes up the alignment chart. In reality, the alignment chart is 2 sets of opposing moral forces, good and evil, and then law and chaos, with neutrality strewn in the middle. In order to understand the alignment chart, we need to understand these 2 conflicts, because they essentially just make all of the alignment chart possible. So let's focus on that first conflict, good and evil. For our monkey brains, this is a very easy conflict to understand. You might argue that that's how our monkey brains work. We see things as bad or good. If something comes at you and starts attacking you, that's bad, but if someone starts helping you, that's good. It's a sort of survival mechanism that we've had over the years, and it's generally how our brains work. We recognize patterns, so we can tell when something's a threat, when something's good, or when something's just nasty. Good and evil, as described in D&D, usually relates to self-sacrifice. A character on the good side of the conflict is generally going to sacrifice themselves for the good of others. For example, you might have a paladin who sacrifices his means and his time, and of course, maybe even his life, to defend the innocent. But then you have someone who is evil on the evil side of the spectrum. Evil characters often sacrifice the needs of others for their own gain. On one side, you have someone who's self-sacrificing, and the other side, you have someone who is willing to sacrifice others for their self. A warlock who is willing to make deals with the devil in order to get what they want. The paladin doesn't really care that who they're saving may be a vagabond or a rogue. They're just willing to save the innocent. Whereas the warlock doesn't care that his party members might get hurt if he makes this deal. And again, this is a conflict that our monkey brains are pretty much geared towards. But what about the second one? Law versus chaos. Well, for one, our monkey brains don't exactly work this way. For example, you have a good king of a kingdom, and a murder cult comes up and tries to get rid of them. Well, you might say that obviously the murder cult or the bad guys, and the king is the good guy. Well, what about an evil dictatorship? Let's switch things around. Let's have an evil dictatorship versus a good rebellion. Now, in our minds, the rebellion is good, the dictatorship is evil. But according to law chaos, if you're looking from the lawful perspective, the dictator is just as valid as the king. Why? Because the dictator can make things efficient. Sure, the king has good morals and helps lead his people nicely, but harsh punishments and incentives like that are also valid ways of bringing about order. The battle between law and chaos is not as clear as good and evil. It's a philosophical question for sure, but definitely one that our monkey brains have a hard time wrapping our heads around. We don't necessarily see leadership as a bad thing, but we also don't see it as a good thing either. Now, you can train your brain to actually see the inner conflict, but sometimes it can take some time, and sometimes we tend to blur lawful with good and chaos with evil. It's just after a while of playing a more chaotic character and after a while of playing a more lawful character, you tend to see the difference. It's just something that is really hard at first. Now that we got all of our conflicts covered, how does it become a chart? Well, for one, obviously, if you are aligned with good, you go up the chart. If you are aligned with evil, you go down the chart. If you're aligned with lawful, or chaos, you go left and right. The neutrally bits in the middle act as a way for you to kind of set yourself between some of these extremes. For example, if you want to be chaotic, but you don't want to be necessarily good or evil, you can set yourself on chaos instead of just good or evil. And for clarity, if someone is neutral, it generally means they won't pick a choice between the two unless given incentives. So, a chaotic neutral, like I mentioned, would be someone who generally tends towards chaos, breaking down the system, fighting against the system, but they don't really care about good or evil. As long as there's money to be paid either way, or some other incentives for choosing one or the other, they'd probably make that choice. For example, a Fae may not help someone out of the kindness of their heart or out of obligation like a lawful / good person would do. But if they do have something to gain, they're definitely going to help. It's just because they're chaotic, their hands aren't exactly tied by any sort of arrangement. So you can start to see how this chart is coming together. You have the edges with like lawful good, where someone has strong convictions towards law and good. You have the neutrally bits, where you have someone who's leaning towards evil, leaning towards chaos, or an extreme of a particular philosophy. And true neutral, where someone is sort of in the middle of all of it. For reference, I'd say the more neutral your character is, the harder it generally is to play because you have less ideals and aspirations. So for starting players, lawful good, chaotic good, these are generally what I'd say would be good starting alignments, whereas neutral good, neutral chaotic, and neutral lawful can be more of like your second character. And obviously, a true neutral character probably shouldn't be a character. Not that you couldn't ever make it work, it's just you'd have to finagle it. And usually when I see neutral characters, they usually don't really play a part in the story because they really are just doing whatever they feel like. Again, not that that's a bad thing, it's just really hard to roleplay with someone who doesn't really have any aspirations, or at least doesn't necessarily know how their character would react to something. For example, with a lawful good character, you're generally going to know that whatever they're going to do next falls in line with their moral code. With a true neutral character, well, it just depends on what you feel the character would benefit most from, or at least what the character thinks they'd benefit most from, which sometimes can be obvious and sometimes not so much. Which is an excellent segue into the next misconception, that you can't play evil. If you noticed before, when I was talking about the starting classes, I never mentioned any evil alignment as a really good starting alignment. Well, that's because evil's dookie. You can kind of think of it like this. Every alignment in D&D brings something to the table. A good alignment is going to move the story along and make the characters more heroic. A lawful alignment is going to keep the characters on track. A chaotic character adds some fun and excitement to a story that would more normally, if there was only lawful characters, be a dry, repetitive trudge through the main storyline. An evil character, on the other hand, serves a particularly special role that is extremely hard to pull off, especially in a campaign not designed for it, and it is that they put the campaign in another direction. Now, this can be a good thing. For example, if your narrative is that there's an evil wizard going around causing problems, and you have an evil character who has the end goal of becoming the most powerful wizard in the world, you might join the party in order to get rid of the enemy wizard. This then takes an interesting perspective. The party now has a choice. They can continue working with this obviously evil person who is willing to help them defeat the bigger bad, but they might possibly make a big bad in the process. At the same time, an evil person might have a completely different goal than everyone else in the party. Generally, evil characters can pull the party into completely unexpected directions. The main story could be moved from something simple to something quite complex, and overall, the tone of the story just changes once the players start to reveal their evil intentions. Again, this can be a really great thing. It can also suck, especially when players aren't really planning on the story to be derailed or move in a completely different direction. It can be really off-putting to have the evil player just suddenly announce that, hey, I am the bad guy now. It can also set people on edge when they realize that a character is evil, because they might assume that the character might do something during the campaign to show just how evil they are. I one time played a lawful evil paladin. His whole trope was, well, he was racist. He saw anything less than being human as being, well, less than human. Elves and dwarves were fine, because that's how they were, but half-elves, half-orcs, animal hybrids like tabaxi and lizardfolk, he didn't exactly like it. Though the party did agree that the lawful evil character was a fun idea and wanted to play around with it, the whole time he kept being treated like he was sus, even though throughout the whole campaign, the paladin didn't do anything all that bad. The only thing he did was every so often make a comment about, well, half-breeds or lesser folk, as he would say. But I definitely say I can't blame the people I was playing with. A very common thing that happens with evil characters is, well, that they're evil. Even if you know the reasons, it can sometimes be used as an excuse, and then all of a sudden the party is doing something that they just didn't want to do to begin with. As far as this misconception goes, I'd say stray more on the side of caution when using an evil character. If you could do the same character concept, but with just a different alignment, then generally that's a good idea. And if you can't, maybe think of some other idea you like better. But if you want to insert your evil character into a good campaign, then you definitely are going to have to talk with people, and you're definitely going to have a good story reason why they are evil. As you might have guessed, I'd also recommend no new players joining the evil side, just because, yeah, that's going to be hard to roleplay on top of all the stuff they have to learn about the game. So if you're new and you're thinking about playing someone evil, just don't. Just don't. It's a hard thing sometimes for even experienced players to do and pull off correctly, just because, yeah, it's so easy to slip from being the alignment of evil to the alignment of douchebag. So that's 2 misconceptions out of the way, but what's the next one? Have you ever had a time when you didn't do exactly what you thought was morally right or morally good for you to do? Did you ever just slightly do something that you know you wouldn't do normally for the right incentives? Well, that, my friends, is the truth about alignment. Your character, again, is not always going to choose things based off their alignment. Sometimes the risk or reward of a choice is too high for your character to choose anything else. To make it a bit more abstract and easier to understand, let's take these 3. I will call them red, blue, and white. Inventive names, I know. We put red, blue, and white into one room. The room has 2 doors. These 2 doors are red and blue. Blue, since he is a blue character, is always going to choose the blue door. Red, since he's a red character, is always going to choose the red door, and white has a 50-50. He might flip a coin or something. In this situation where the doors don't have any incentive to choose one or the other, if they're no information given then other than the color, then the characters are going to default to what they do best. Red is going to red, blue is going to blue, and white is just going to decide based off pure luck. But what if we added some interesting new incentives to the equation? Let's say that the person who enters the blue door gets $10 and the person who enters the red door gets nothing. Well, now red is going to still choose the red door, but white is now always going to choose the blue. Why? Because white doesn't care what door he goes through, but he does care about getting $10. $10 is pretty nice. Pretty nice. Now let's take this to the extreme. Let's say that whoever goes through the red door, someone they love dies. Well, red is now going to go through the blue door, along with white and blue, because he doesn't want someone he loves to die. In the case of blue, red, and white, they represent, of course, well, the two different alignments and the neutrality in between them for good or evil, law or chaos, and neutral. Now you can see that alignments aren't everything when it comes to decision making. There's many things that factor into what decisions a character makes that's beyond just the two letters in the corner of their character sheet. Overall, with alignment, treat it like what it is. A quick and easy guide to show the party what sort of ideals your character has. A way to sort of make it easy to see whether or not you'll follow the law or be a little bit rambunctious. Treat it not as the force of choice driving your character, but as a force of choice that drives your character. But overall, just as a last note, just enjoy the game. You don't need alignments. You don't need any of this. You just need to roleplay and have fun. And alignments can help you roleplay and think about your character as you roleplay, but it isn't essential. Well, that's all I have for this time. Comment down below, like and subscribe, and maybe I'll see you again. Bye.